Hi there, Nick here from Conservation Careers, and welcome to the podcast. Now, how can corporate professionals contribute to conservation efforts? What skills can they bring from the boardrooms of the private sector to help wildlife charities specifically to develop and grow? These are some of the topics we discussed with today's guest, Raoul Bollen. Raoul has been on a career journey from the corporate sector, from leading Shell's HR in 10 countries in the Middle East and Kazakhstan, to becoming a business advisor for a charity close to our hearts, Elephants for Africa. Now, together we discuss his career exploration and how the Conservation Career Kickstarter helped him to gain clarity on how to move forwards towards his passion most quickly. Now, Raoul unfolds the challenges, the opportunities, and reflections on making meaningful contributions beyond the corporate world, and how others can follow a similar path to merge their professional skills with their personal passions. It's a passion aligning, skills deploying pod chat. Enjoy. Yeah, and we can just forget that's recording because it doesn't really matter. Yeah. Okay, so the easiest way to get going, Raoul, if it's okay, can you just sort of say your name and perhaps your job title, your current job title, and then from there we can just...
Yeah, sure. I'm Raoul Bollen, and actually currently I have two job titles. I'm the HR strategy consultant for Petroleum Development Oman. I do that virtually now, and I'm also an advisor to the board of Elephants for Africa, the charity that we'll talk about later.
Yeah, wonderful. And thank you so much for jumping on the podcast. We've had some interactions through our communities and various means over the last almost year. And I'm really pleased to have this time and have your time with us today, just to hear about your kind of career exploration, connection to conservation, and how you're kind of balancing your work in the corporate environment, as you just said, with also connecting to your interest in wildlife.
Yeah.
So let's start with your current role, and if that's okay, please, Raoul. Like just paint a picture of your what does it mean to work for? What was it? It was let me get this right. Petroleum Development Oman. Yeah. So what
Yeah.
do you do for them? How does that work?
Yeah. Yeah. So I've been based in Oman for almost 9 years. Recently, I moved to Europe. I'll get to that. But I was really accountable for setting Petroleum Development Oman's people strategy, as they prepare for the energy future, moving into new energies. We need different capabilities. We probably need a different company culture and becoming much more commercial, much more focused on sustainability. So I'm trying to support them through that change and translating that into very specific capabilities that we need to acquire, how we organize ourselves differently. At the same time, I'm quite focused on getting their own HR community sort of up to speed with new capabilities, conducting some assessments, finding out what gaps we have with our own skill sets. So that's very much what I'm doing for Petroleum Development Oman.
How big is the organization? Are we talking tens, hundreds,
Yeah,
thousands? Just give me a feeling of scale.
this is a 9,000 people
Ooh.
company, with on top of that a bunch of contractors producing about 700,000 barrels of oil and equivalent gas a day. So it's quite a big company, by far the biggest of the Sultanate of Oman, and quite a significant player in the Middle East.
That's really amazing. Yeah. And what has been your career to date leading into that? I'm aware you've worked for Shell and others, again,
Yeah,
in like an HR capacity. Just give me a bit of or
yeah,
give us all a bit of an overview of, how you've got to where you are.
yeah, sure. So I have a business degree, study-wise, a master in international business. I guess I was always attracted to international teams, communities, working cross cultures. And straight out of university, I joined Shell around the year 2000. I think they were very much proactively recruiting people. This was a great time to come off the universities and look for jobs. And it was actually Shell who found out that I should work in human resources. I was personally more focused on commercial careers,
Yeah.
but it turned out I was more of a people and organizations person than per se bottom line sales commercial kind of person.
Yeah.
So with them, I've consistently done a human resources job, initially as an advisor in the Netherlands. And then, I was lucky enough to, go up the hierarchy relatively quickly. I had a job in California as the HR manager of one of Shell's refineries in the San Francisco Bay Area. and then I moved to the Middle East. I had a year in Egypt, and at some point in Oman, I was the vice president for the whole Middle East, North Africa, Caspian region, really looking at how we work together with the joint venture partners in that region where there's massive investments in oil and gas, building capabilities of what it takes to work in joint ventures rather than being the sole operating company as Shell tends to be in many of the other regions. So yeah, always in HR, but increasingly in sort of more complex roles, and at some point quite senior leadership positions.
So you've really been on the front line of some of these big corporations and continue to be there on as they're growing and expanding and looking at the kind of skill sets and this and the needs that come into it. It must be, well, quite a fast-paced environment, and I'm guessing quite a kind of challenging environment to work in too. Like, what two bits of this question? Like, what do you really enjoy about working in HR in the commercial world? We're going to talk about conservation in a minute, I promise.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
what are some of the challenges you might want to share about working in your sort of world too that you're kind of happy
Yeah.
to us?
I think what I really enjoyed about doing particularly HR in the corporate world is that I find that most significant challenges that companies have tend to be about people. It's either about the kind of leaders that you develop and appoint, the kind of targets you set, what you sort of incentivize in your organization. So often the biggest successes, but also the biggest failures that companies have do have a very strong people HR element
Mm,
in them that, if HR is done properly, you can really set up an organization for success, make sure that leaders with the right values and focus on, things like safety, well-being, and so on, reach the top rather than the ones who chase short-term successes.
mm,
So I really like that a lot about HR, that in the end, a lot of it is about people and the kind of people that set the tone in an organization.
mm,
Um, what I personally started missing was an element of my own purpose. And that became clearer the more I went up the hierarchy, and I did have these fast-paced jobs with quite some travel, and it definitely a sense of excitement. But I really felt like this is not all that I want to do with my professional life, and I started really looking for aligning my work activities better with what matters to me personally, which is why I've made a few changes recently that I'm, enjoying thoroughly now.
Let's talk about them then. Yeah. So what's been missing when you reflected on your career? Like, what is the element that's been missing, and yeah, where's that come from?
Yeah, but what I missed was a really finding myself to be enough of a force for good.
Mm,
I think that was a big component, and you could argue in some ways the oil and gas industry even can be a force for good. I've
mhm,
seen some of that too, for sure, but I wanted to be much more and closely involved in being a force for good, particularly in conservation.
mm,
Plus, being a lot closer to the actual impact. When you work in the corporate world, especially when I was moving into the more senior regional roles, you tend to be quite far away from where the actual work is done.
mhm,
So that was the second thing that I realized, that I would love to be a lot more closer to, where the action is.
mm.
So those were the two main elements, I think, that got me to do quite some reflections and indeed one or two courses to find out what changes to make.
Mm. And why specifically kind of conservation or wildlife? If you want to be a force for good, you can do lots of different things in the world. Like, what was drawing you towards what we might call nature or biodiversity? Like,
Yeah,
where does that
I
passion come from?
I found that I found that a difficult question because it's
Mm.
such a deep uh yeah, calling almost. I think I've always liked the outdoors.
Yeah.
Even as a child, I grew up in a slightly rural area in the Netherlands, and we would always do, hiking and whatever wildlife we have there. I was always quite excited about seeing birds or deer. And also, I realized that whenever I was in charge of designing family trips, they would, be very focused on nature and wildlife rather than maybe the city trips and the cultural stuff. So I don't know exactly why that is, but it's been part of me. I even always feel a lot better when I'm outdoor than when I'm inside of a building. And obviously on the conservation side, it's such a burning platform that, it needs whoever, wants to come in and support. It's highly necessary. But yeah, it's been, I guess, part of me without really knowing exactly where it came from, to be honest, Nick.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's like a calling. I love that.
Yeah,
Something you just
yeah.
do naturally. You didn't even need to question. It was just there.
No,
Yeah.
no, that I've known for a while that at some point I wanted to do something with wildlife conservation. I didn't know what it was and when and how exactly I would go about it, but that was always going to be at some point, the next thing I was going to do. It just came a
Mm.
little bit earlier than I had initially planned.
So how did you then like break it down for us? How did you take this passion, this interest, this calling, this thing that's been a little bit missing in your career, and how do you then explore and start to try and kind of fill that gap or sort of
Yeah,
realign some of your values towards where you wanted to be?
yeah, yeah. So one thing I realized, and in a slightly cynical way, this is where COVID was in a way made a positive contribution
Yeah.
to my work life because Petroleum Development Oman got used to working virtually. I had a chance to move back to Europe, which made lots of sense for family reasons, and
Mhm.
still work for them, continue the project to support them with this transition that I'm still supporting today. But I can do it in perhaps 60% of my time. And I chose to not fill the rest of my work week with other customers,
Mm.
but rather almost finally do something with this bigger purpose that I had parked for some time. And that's for me where the Kickstarter program came in from Conservation Careers, because I had thought about it for some time. I didn't really know where to start. And then this program just that was it, because it gives you exactly the tools, the difficult questions that you need to start shaping what that looks like. But yeah, I think those were the elements. I finally had this, I took the decision to not work full time on commercial HR consultancy opportunities anymore, but rather do that in sort of 60% of my time. And then my very first step was to join the course and just work through the exercises. And I think the rest, and sort of, from in my case, luckily took care of itself.
Mm. And what's interesting with your path, and we're not here to kind of sell the Kickstarter or us. We're
Mm,
delighted to have helped and supported you to kind of reconnect with what you've done. But briefly, for those that listen, the Kickstarter program is about self-reflection. It's about understanding who you are and what you value, what you're good at, what you love. Number two, it's about where you might go within your career, what you might connect with, what you might want to do, and then to kind of pull a plan together. And what you've done is not change careers. You kept your career going, but then you're working in parallel and using this kind of 40% free time for good, if you like,
yeah,
having kind of worked through the program. That's right. What was the kind of outcome of the
that's
reflection and navigating options within the kind of conservation
yeah.
sphere? Like where did it take you?
Yeah, no, I think it took me some very specific things. I mean, the first
Hmm.
bit I found out is that I really liked small to medium-sized community-based wildlife charities. I think the small to medium-sized probably comes from my experience in working already in quite complex corporate organizations where I've done my share of, working interfaces and aligning different directorates around stuff. I wanted something very small, tangible, where I was close to um, the action. The other bit that the program helped me see was that I really want to add an element of getting my hands dirty, which is why this
Mm.
trip to Botswana was so helpful. And I hope to be able to do that on some recurring basis, that I'm not just, the person who helps with the plans and the proposals, but also actually just goes there and sees the action. So um and then yeah, the community based charity, I hadn't even heard of the term before I did the course,
Mm.
but I think that was something that aligned very much with what I believed to be true as to what works for any organization. I've seen that even in the oil and gas sector, if you want to
Mm.
have sustainable successes, it can only work if you create win-win situations with local communities that benefit from you being there,
Mm.
and so that resonated with me really well, that, you involving local communities in the conservation work So yeah, I think those were the key elements around the kind of organization that I was looking for. The bit that, the other half that I learned was there is probably, even though I don't know anything about conservation, I'm not a biologist by any means. I felt I had no relevant experience. The skills I've learned in my professional career actually can be of benefit to these charities. And I was beginning to see that during the course. And I'm luckily I'm still seeing it now with my work, even though I have this steep learning curve and I want to be a lot more impactful than I am today. But that was the other bit that I was beginning to see. Like, even though, you know, I don't have any relevant experience at first glance, actually, yeah, I can be of help to the organizations.
And that's something we talk about a lot on the podcast, actually, is the skill sets, often found in the corporate sector, the private sector, are so
Yeah,
valued and they're so needed within conservation. And actually, you can often pick up a lot of the knowledge and stuff, as part of just embedding yourself within the sector and
yeah,
helping, which is what you're doing. Yeah, but you've got to get over that kind of barrier of feeling like an outsider or
yes,
imposter and just jump
absolutely.
in because we're
Imposter. Yeah,
we're a friendly bunch. We need help.
yeah,
So
yeah,
what have you been doing then? I know you're in a business advisor now to the board of Elephants for Africa. Yeah.
yeah,
Tell us
yeah.
about
That's
that.
right.
How did that happen? What are you
Yeah,
doing?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So again, part of um, the Pathfinder Kickstarter exercise was to use your network and
Mm,
find people who are doing something that you would like to do.
mm,
And I had committed, like, I'm going to do all these exercises diligently. So I was using my network, from my professional life, LinkedIn, but also from this very conservation careers platform.
mm,
So I had a couple of conversations, but one of them was with Dr. Kate Evans, who actually is part of the network.
mm,
And she reached out saying, maybe I have the kind of organization that, you know, suits what you're looking for. So have a read and we can talk about, if you like it, we can have a follow-up conversation. And it was exactly what I was looking for. They have they are a small, medium-sized charity. They are very much community focused, have local staff doing the work in country. So that didn't take a lot of convincing on my side. So I started off with a couple of Zoom calls, basically, with Kate, who is the founder and CEO of Elephants for Africa. They focus basically on three pillars. They, on the one hand, they are hardcore research for elephant conservation in Botswana, using their research insights for, conservation strategies and so on. But they also work a lot with the communities to help them coexist with the wildlife and basically protect communities, help them get their livelihoods back, because elephants can be quite disturbing for the livelihoods of the farmers. And thirdly, they invest in children, in education. So that really resonated with me. So we started off with a couple of Zoom calls just for me to listen, and I was trying to use my experience in the corporate world to just ask some structured questions about where would you like to be 5 to 10 years from now? How do you think you could measure success? A little bit of looking back as well. What have been your biggest successes? What are you worried about? What are some of the opportunities? So I was trying to help her make a little bit of an X-ray of the organization, which was helpful for her, as well, that's what the feedback was. But when she offered me to go to Botswana and actually really see the team in action, I think that's when I really started learning a lot more about what it actually was, right? Because you can
yeah.
get some sort of an idea from the Zoom calls, but to be in Botswana with the team that was really an amazing experience.
How long were you
Uh,
out there for? What did you do?
yeah, I spent about 10 days with the team,
Yeah.
and I try to really divide my time over these three pillars. So
Mm,
I had a full day in Maun, which is sort of the city around the wildlife areas in Botswana, where there was a conference organized by secondary school children for secondary school children. And this was organized by, or sort of partnered with, different NGOs and safari companies, where children themselves work through the topic of wildlife conservation, climate change. And it was just amazing to see how they are working through these topics, teaching each other through dance, role plays, presentations about all the challenges and the opportunities. So we spent quite some time there. And then I had a chance to follow around the researchers. So we were staying in the research camp, which is a very basic camp in the Boteti River area in Botswana, where I just spent my days in the camp, helping them also with the cooking roster and joining them on the drives when they just follow elephants around, sampling elephant dung to just examine what they've been eating, check numbers of elephants, check what they're eating, sample the leaves for processing in the lab, sampling the sand that they've been stirring up. So yeah, I think the whole bit of following the researchers around. And then the third
You
bit
you were
was
getting your hands dirty. I'm just circling
yeah,
back to what
yeah,
you said
yeah.
about yeah.
Yeah,
Quite literally.
that's quite literally, and that's really what I wanted. I also didn't want to stay in a safari lodge nearby or anything. I just wanted to stay
Yeah,
with them in the camp,
yeah.
be on the cooking roster, experience the camp life. And I know being there for 10 days is not the same as actually living there full time, but at least I have a feel for what it takes to be a conservationist or a researcher in that area.
Yeah.
And indeed, visiting the villages where I saw how many farmers had actually stopped farming. There were big lands without any crops because the elephants would come in anyway and destroy everything, right? Because this area, actually, the elephant population is doing reasonably well, which is good news. But then the coexistence in some areas isn't working very well because, elephants destroy their livelihoods. And the work that Elephants for Africa is doing, part of them is, for example, creating these cluster fences, which I saw in action where they're putting up the fences and with a not that big of an investment of around $6,000, you can bring the livelihoods back for 60 farmers. They can have this solar powered fence around their, cluster plots, they call them. 60
Hmm.
people can farm safely. So when I was there, I saw them to, begin growing crops again because they had made this successful bid through Elephants for Africa on getting these cluster fences. So just seeing that in action, talking to the farmers, but also experiencing the endless driving, right? Because sometimes you wonder, why don't we visit multiple locations in one day? Well, that's because it's an endless drive with these jeeps and the heat. And, I also experienced, for example, how we had not visited one of the communities, the farmers for a while because the 1984 Land Cruiser had some broken parts, and we didn't have the funds to replace the parts. So you see the reality of the funding constraints where it's working well in 5 out of the 6 communities. In the 6th one, there's a 40-year-old car broken down and we can't fix it. And that's how constrained, how tight the money is. So I thought, seeing all of that in a visit was, yeah, that was very impactful for me personally. And I also realized when I was there, like, but this is exactly what I want to do. This is why I made this change. This is what I'm committed to contributing to. The energy, the talent of the people that you work with, who choose to basically live under these more challenging circumstances of living in a research camp away from their families, driving endlessly in these hot vehicles. It was very inspiring to be part of that.
Yeah, that's amazing. It just shows the importance of visiting, seeing, understanding, so that when you go back home, it's all fresh in your mind and you can really
Yeah.
help at a kind of deeper, more impactful level. What have you learnt about like the skills that you have available that can help an organization like Elephants for Africa, and even how other people in similar situations can be helping? Like
Yeah.
what is it you hope to achieve? How can you help specifically?
Yeah. Yeah. At some point, and this is also what the team was encouraging me.
Mm.
The fact that I'm not a biologist and I
Hmm.
don't know that much about what they're doing can be a real strength as well, just because I
Mm.
was asking different questions. Um, so this idea of looking slightly rationally at
Mm.
it, even as a business, where's the
Mm.
money coming from?
Mm.
What are we spending it on? Try to get a bit of a picture for the cost. So yeah, I think that the advantage is in actually being a bit different, having a
Mm.
different perspective on things. So yeah, I was looking at, partnerships with surrounding lodges. What if we bring tourists maybe who are a little bit like me and just want to see about the research camp? What if we bring them here?
Mm.
Can we meet them and see if we can refresh some of those visits and partnerships? Um, and the other bit I realized when I was there is that because of all the resource constraints, there's tons of stuff that we do well. The only thing that we don't do well enough is probably selling the story, because there are
Mm.
no resources to actually do communications and a little bit of marketing around this impact that we're making. So having, I guess, a little bit more of a commercial business perspective and less of a biology deep into the content and the research can be an advantage that I'm trying to bring to the team.
Yeah, I love that. You asked Kate as part of the Zoom calls and early exploration, like, where do you want to be in 5 years' time? Blah, 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 blah. Where do you hope to be in 5 years' time? I don't know how long your commitment is, you don't need to share, but like, what do you hope to have achieved with 5 years of this sort of effort?
Yeah, yeah. Well, for one, I really want to be, and this is the competitive bit in me. I want to be the best advisor to boards for charity. I mean, that sounds a little overly competitive, perhaps, but that's just the competitive part in me. I really want to be good at this. So continue to use my network to talk with other charities just to learn what they are doing.
Mm.
Um, and get different perspectives. I try to come up with innovative ideas around sourcing for different pieces of work, like using Upwork for a little bit
Mm.
of social media help,
Hmm.
using my own network of people who are willing to donate a little bit of time in areas. I found a great ex-communications leader in Shell who is now helping us with Elephants for Africa as well, just because she
Nice.
got so passionate about it. So that's one thing. I really want to be much better and more impactful than I am today.
Yeah.
Um, if Elephants for Africa will keep me, then I'll certainly stay with them. But I do think at some point I could add a second or a third charity to it. I'm in the fortunate position with this double role of still having my consultancy work
Hmm.
that I can do unpaid work for the conservation sector.
Mm.
So at some point, adopting or getting a chance to support a second or third NGO, whether that's as a board member or an advisor to the board or an advisor to the CEO, whatever capacity
Mhm.
fits. But I think there would be advantages in seeing different organizations, maybe in slightly different settings,
Mm.
um, just to, yeah, get different perspectives and deeper learnings about what works, what doesn't work, expand my network. So hopefully, yeah, in a few years from now, I'll be doing this, is having supported EFA to grow. I think we can make a lot more impact even if we would just be able to grow our budget a little bit.
Hmm.
And then, yeah, hopefully be pulled into comparable small to medium-sized charities where I can continue to learn and contribute. I also and I hope to maybe get a few more people like me from the private sector to be willing and inspired, energized, whatever, to follow a similar path, to donate some of their time to the conservation sector.
I was thinking that as you were saying it, yeah, it's like if you could like replicate what you're doing and almost create a program, a system, and using your HR expertise to bring
Yeah,
people from outside in, creating roles, connecting, matchmaking,
yeah.
and having the framework around that they can thrive within.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's a bit of the feedback that I got from Dr. Cade and others, that
Yeah.
it's already very helpful if people are willing to give some time one-off to an NGO, but if people are actually willing to commit, even if it's for 2 or 3 hours a week, but commit for a longer period of time so that you get a bit of a return on investment from the onboarding, because you have to learn quite a bit about the
Mm.
charity, the people, the direction that we're going in. So if people are willing to stay on longer,
Mm.
you can make, yeah, quite a big difference. And there is such a shortage of almost all kinds of resources, networks in the sector that, yeah, I hope to be able to get a few more people to do something similar.
Yeah. And we'd love to be able to help with that too. Yeah. There's such an opportunity for making a huge impact, isn't there? It's not a blank canvas, but we could do an awful lot more better. And I think we could learn an awful lot from people with business acumen background and working in the kind of corporate environment. Um,
And Nick, what I've learned
Please, yeah.
for me personally, and I shared this with my former Shell colleagues, it does
Mm.
very much go both ways because for me personally, I was at a point where I wasn't enjoying at some point my HR corporate work as much
Mm,
because I was
mm,
missing this sense of purpose, doing something meaningful to a point where it sort of energized me. Now, combining it
mm,
actually has given me a lot more energy on both sides. I now feel much more happy or, content with my balance and even my contributions to my original scope as the, HR consultant for the energy sector is now much more sustainable because I have a proper balance. So you get a lot in return for
mm,
it too. So probably more than I can give, I get back by just getting the energy, the network, the learnings, doing something completely different. It's very refreshing.
mm. Yeah, we've spoken to a number of people whereby the skills that people have, they love deploying them and they're very good at doing it. But often it's like the purpose that's missing. It's the kind of the why, if you like. And
Yeah,
so one way of doing that is sort of pivoting and saying, I'm working in marketing communications here. I'm going to work in marketing communications for something like Elephants of
absolutely.
Africa and just
Yeah,
just just replugging your skills elsewhere. Another way of doing it is what you've done, really, which is keeping that going, but then connecting with purpose outside of your work and viewing
yeah,
your career and life as a whole. Do
yeah,
you know what I mean? Rather than there's the career and there's the life. Just, if you see the whole as the piece, then
yeah,
actually you connect the purpose and the skills and both
absolutely.
elements are lifted, which is wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. And I probably also can still use my network and my learnings in the corporate sector to the
Yeah.
benefit of the conservation sector. At least that's what I'm sort of trying and aiming for at this point, because those contacts and networks can be quite helpful. We're currently looking for a corporate social responsibility partner for Elephants for Africa.
Mm,
So I'm just beginning that journey, but there's so much we can do with a bunch of solar panels and batteries to keep farmers safe
mm.
that I want to use my network in the energy side to see whether I can find a good partner and find some win-wins in collaborating on that.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. What have you learnt about the kind of conservation sector now? You've kind of started to get your hands a little bit dirty. Like, honestly, like
Yeah,
what are your reflections now?
yeah,
I don't know, a year in or maybe just less.
yeah. I've For one, I thought there were actually a lot of similarities with the energy sector, which was very surprising. One was the one we talked about earlier, that you can't get anything done sustainably if there isn't a deep win-win with the local communities. I found it to be very true in the energy sector as well as in conservation so far, right? I'm still learning.
Mm,
The other bit I thought was there's a real similarity around the importance of partnerships.
hmm
There's a lot that, for example, Elephants for Africa can do in the Boteti area by collaborating with other NGOs, with local, bird NGOs or others, jointly apply for grants, jointly try and influence the government around permit lead times and things like that, which I recognize very much from the energy sector.
mm,
Plus the focus on local talent, which is something I
mm,
feel we've got
mm,
going quite well in Elephants for Africa, where you really want to find great, in our case, Botswana talent,
mm,
develop and retain them, which is a bit more challenging in this sector, I must say,
mm,
in conservation, to retain talented people with the limitations on terms and conditions. But there are quite a lot of similarities. I did feel, as you said, the welcoming feel of the conservation community. Especially for me, staying in the camp, I felt at home immediately. There was
mm,
some common purpose and positive vibe in
mm,
that little group that I haven't felt as strongly, I must say, in the energy sector, that you immediately feel this connect, because you connect on a very well on purpose and what you find important in life. That's why all of you are there, right? So I thought
mm,
that was really nice.
mm,
The the depressing side coming from the private sector is around the resource constraints, how all funding is, project focused. Nobody wants to pay for overhead, for example,
Hmm.
or it's very difficult to plan ahead for the longer term issue, longer term contracts to staff, for example, because all funding is for a very specific activity.
Mm.
But often there are quite some strings attached. You need to do a lot of bookkeeping and report writing. Nobody wants to pay for the bookkeeper and writing the report time, but there's a lot of that. So that felt very unfair coming in from the private sectors. Like, nobody wants to pay for the gasoline or the bookkeeping, but it certainly needs to happen.
Yeah.
So I thought that was, I had honestly thought there would be more private sector participation partnerships for a lot of the NGOs, but the few that I've talked to, that wasn't really the case. A lot of it is grant based for a specific scope without much of a long-term
Mm.
guarantee, which I think makes the planning, strategizing, offering security to people. It makes it a lot more difficult than what I'm used to coming from the private sector.
Mm.
So yeah, it has this, if you're not careful, you can be a little bit, how do I call that? Maybe it's not really depressed, but I thought it was a bit disheartening to see that for one of the biggest priorities we have, as people,
Mm.
you really depend on grants and donations of a few wealthy individuals often,
Mm.
and talented people who are willing to not pursue probably better paid career path, but dedicate their lives to this. So I feel you're very dependent on getting people to really choose to do this, and a few individuals who are willing to make donations.
Mm.
Thought that was a bit more worrying even than I had thought before I came into the sector.
Yeah. Yeah. It links really to resourcing being such a limitation, in the sector, particularly, as you said, around kind of donor projects, boom and bust funding, and
Yeah,
securities around that. And I think it also reflects or showcases to me the importance of people like you. You understand businesses and the corporate world, you know the language, you know who to speak to, how to build those partnerships. Often we within the conservation community, we're not as comfortable having those discussions with
mm,
businesses and those types of institutions. And the best way to do that is to bring people like you in and start to make and build those connections and understand how it works. And also, I think with um, using kind of your business sort of strategy hat, understanding, well, how can we break out beyond the donor model as well? Like what products and services can we create that generate income that can grow and scale and help us
yeah,
to kind of to grow beyond and alongside a donor type model which is quite limiting, really.
yeah, yeah. No, exactly. I think a little bit of thinking out of the box tends to be easier when you bring in new people. I mean, you probably get a bunch of ideas that will never work, but every now and then there are some refreshing ideas that can work, right? And yeah, I think for us, a lot of it is about getting these more unrestricted funds, so that you can actually do a little bit more marketing, social media presence, more individual donors, but also win-win partnerships with the corporate sector, indeed, because I know from especially new generations into the workforce in the private sector are very keen on having a proper match with their personal purpose. I think more than previous generations, um, talented young professionals are looking for that. So many companies have that challenge of how do we actually understand what it is? Can we provide for it in the normal context of our company, or do we need some of these partnerships to offer
Mm.
options for people to be involved outside of their normal job? So I
Mm.
I do think, yeah, with hopefully better partnership between private sector and conservation sector, we can grow that a little bit.
Mm. I think that's really exciting too, actually. Yeah. And again, more conversations like this we have where we see that often the change within the corporate sector to wanting to help the environment more is coming from within staff, not just from within consumer pressure. It's the
Mm,
staff who want to kind of see
yeah.
this change happen, and that actually can build momentum quite quickly, hopefully. As we start to kind of wrap up, and we're going to go to our audience in a little bit and ask for their questions and feedback too after we finish our recording. I'd love to know, like, what advice would you give someone like you who's listening in and they'd love to connect more with their purpose, maybe change their career or do something alongside their career like you're doing? What careers advice might you offer prospective career switchers or explorers? Let's call them that.
Yeah, so I got this question in the Shell alumni conference I
Ah,
was in, and I actually did advise him to take the Kickstarter course. So I know you said in the beginning, don't make, it doesn't have to be a sales pitch for the Kickstarter course, but actually I do think for people who want to understand the conservation sector, understand themselves a bit better as to in this sector, what would I like, where do I fit, what gives me energy, and equally discount some of the other options that don't fit as well. I think that would actually, it has been my first advice of just follow the program, because it will give you the personal clarity that you're looking for with the reflections and sort of demystifying the sector. Um, I think that would be one. The other bit that I've been encouraging people to do indeed is to make this slightly longer term part-time commitment, find a way to partner with an organization and commit for a few hours a week, whatever you can give, even if it's one or two, but make it a bit longer term, because then it's worth the onboarding time, building the relations. Yeah, and then I think learning about a new sector is very energizing. So for people to find out what their best way is to learn, for me, as you can maybe tell from this conversation, I'm a bit of an extrovert. I love one-on-one dialogues, but for others, it may be, lots of podcasts, reading articles, whatever. Find out what works for you. But just dive into this sector, because there's so much to learn and so much to offer. So yeah, I'm trying to get more people who have lots of experience and a rich network to offer to contribute to the conservation sector with some of these tips. But yeah, if they do one thing, I still feel it should be the Kickstarter program, because that will give you the guidance and the clarity of where to start.
amazing. Well, thank you, Raoul. It's been really nice getting to know you properly, chatting on the podcast. Thank you for sharing your time. Two things that really stand out for me from the conversation is, one, your commitment to the cause, but to making the change happen for yourself. And also like the strategy as well. I think you've been quite strategic in what you've done, which is really quite clever. So we've kind of given you guidance and support, but you've driven it home and made it happen, and seeing you kind of reaping the benefits and supporting Elephants for Africa. And Kate's a friend of ours. She's a course leader and she's been on the podcast, and it's wonderful to know that you've connected with her and are supporting her as well. So yeah, so thank you for everything you're doing.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that, everyone. If you did, then please do hit the subscribe button to get notified of new episodes as they drop. And also, please give us a rating or a review, because it really helps us to get in front of more people, and we really enjoy reading them all. As you'll have heard, our podcasts are now recorded in front of a live audience who sit in and listen to the chat, and then after the mics are turned off, they get a chance to talk to the host, to share their thoughts, and also to ask questions. It's a really great format. If you'd like to be in the audience, all you need to do is join the Conservation Careers Academy. Now, in the Conservation Careers Academy, you'll get full access to the world's biggest conservation job board, listing over 15,000 jobs, volunteer and internships across the globe each year. You'll also enjoy access to our amazing CC Pro private members community with regular events, networking and support. Plus, you'll get full access to our growing library of career boosting resources, guides and templates. And best of all, it only costs a few dollars, euros or pounds per month to join the Academy. Now, to find out more, please visit conservation-careers.com/academy, or simply click the join button at the top of our website. See you on the inside.